Continuing where we left off with Heidegger, I'm going to be talking about Jean-Paul Sartre. Probably Jean-Paul Sartre is the most famous of the existentialists, particularly to the non-specialist public. And one reason for that is because he was not simply a scholar or a writer of academic books, but a novelist and a playwright. Okay? Novels and plays get a wider readership generally than scholarly books. So many people who have read Sartre have not read Being and Nothingness, but they've read his Troubled Sleep, Age of Reason, The Reprieve, Nausea, his various novels, or they have either seen or read some of his major plays, including No Exit, Condemned of Altona, and one of my favorites actually is his adaptation of the Trojan Women, which is a play by Euripides. Sartre gives it the full-up existentialist treatment, and he was a very gifted writer. Of course, gifted means that you have talent and you've done the work. People, artists, particularly musicians, I've known, have said, people say to them, "Oh, I wish I had your gift," to which they always reply, start practicing. Yeah, but I don't have the gift. Well, neither do I. I practice. I do it a lot. Okay. But anyway, yeah, he was a brilliant man, and he was in very good company as far as some of the major cultural figures, particularly philosophers. He won the Nobel Prize, or I should mention that because you probably heard that. Won the Nobel Prize in literature. Actually, before it was awarded, he wrote to the Nobel Committee and said, "Please don't. I can't accept this, so please don't." And they, however, their decision was, well, once we have decided it's irrevocable, so you're going to get the Nobel Prize whether you want it or not. And he said, "Okay, I turn it down." And there are a few reasons for that. One, if I take you seriously when you're praising me, and I don't take you seriously when you're criticizing me, then that's bad faith. That's hypocrisy. And what's more, why don't I take you seriously when you're criticizing me? Because this is a bourgeois prize. The criteria by which you judge who gets the prize for literature is it's really so much a matter of convention and of exhausted ideas and so forth, and I just don't put any credibility to your judgment in these matters. Now, just in case you don't know, there are 7 different Nobel Prizes. Okay, all from the same foundation, but there's a prize in physics, there's a prize in chemistry, there's a medicine and physiology, and so forth, and each is decided by a panel of some of the most eminent figures in that field. So you don't have, basically, when people say, "Oh, this is hello," is all just political, as frequently people do. Well, if you're talking about the Nobel Peace Prize, yeah, maybe. Nobel Prize in Economics, possibly, although that usually goes to someone who's invented some sort of quantitative tool that economists find useful. But as for physics, medicine and physiology, chemistry, that sort of thing, this is done by people who have made major contributions in the field. So, literature, Sartre thought, really, I don't acknowledge the value of your judgment in this field. I'm not willing to compromise my own judgment in order to do so. Well, okay, and actually he was fairly polite about it too. But Sartre writes on themes that are already familiar, because going right back to Kierkegaard, Nietzsche, and certainly very much Heidegger, who I just previously talked about. The concern with being, the concern with freedom, very much, very, very clear tie to Heidegger. Sartre talks about different categories of being, and it's an interesting part of his philosophy if you want to go into it in great depth. Being in itself and being for itself. Being for itself is aware of itself. Okay? Our freedom comes from our being self-aware, that we can make choices, that we are free. That's being for itself. Being in itself, it has plasticity. Okay? A chair doesn't have being in itself, but a chair has being for itself. Okay? At one point, Sartre writes, several points actually, he writes, "Man is a useless passion." Why is that? Well, because we want the comfort, the stability of being in itself, but we also want being for itself. We want the freedom, the possibilities of being for itself. So how can we do both at once? We can't. Being in itself, for itself, is not something that exists. And Sartre notes that various medieval thinkers who talk about the nature of God see, God that being whose essence is existence is essentially, in Sartrean terms, would analyze into God is being in itself, for itself. So our project is to become God, which we are unable to do. And so man is a useless passion. Well, key themes in Sartre, things that are unique. One, his ability to express existential ideas in terms of flesh and blood examples. He has an unparalleled ability to do that. He expresses the uncanniness, as Heidegger would call it, if you will, the absurdity of the world. Okay? The interplay between experience, our habits of life, which give rise to words, the, if you will, emptiness, the uncanniness of it all. Example that's sometimes used is Sartre talks about a bench. My intro philosophy class, I tried to get my students to do something similar, but using a desk, using their own desk as the example. Sartre writes about a man who looks at a bench, says, "This is so strange. This word, what connection does the word have with what is actually in the world?" Well, habits of use, but look at all the things that we take for granted. Isn't it uncanny that there's this object and I just sort of believe it exists for me to sit on? And it's a mundane thing, but mundane things are uncanny once you realize that it is simply a sort of freezing in time of all the infinite possibilities. Someone once referred to photography as a time-stopping art. You take a photograph, you stop time. Sartre was interested in the aesthetics of photography, which of course have to be different from that of painting. You don't stop time with a painting, right? So, uncanniness. Existence is weird. It's odd that there is anything. Okay? And any mundane object, any mundane habit, any mundane custom may at some point prod us into realizing this is all very uncanny, just as Heidegger talked about. This can lead to an aha moment. I like that phrase, and actually that comes from Sartre. An aha moment. We time stopping, if you will. We suddenly realize that this moment, stripped of expectations, preoccupations, preconceptions, habits, and routines of day-to-day life, is simply the object of my experience, simply my experience itself. There's something rather odd about it. Okay? This is actually the beginning, as Plato said, philosophy begins in wonder. Okay, a colleague in graduate school was once talking about a passage in the Republic where Plato's trying to illustrate something. He gets a fix on his 3 fingers, and he says, how can it be that this one is longer than this one, but shorter than this one? How is it that we make sense of calling something both long and short at the same time? And that seems fairly simple, mundane, unmysterious, except then he sort of unravels the whole architecture of the universe from that. Or at least a beautiful and very intriguing model of the universe from that. So, yeah, the most mundane things can have the, if you will, can be portals to the weirdness, the uncanniness of existence itself. Second theme is possibilities. We are making up ourselves. We make up our lives as we go along. And as Sartre says, we are the sum total of our choices. Okay? There's not some preformed, predetermined self who we are. We are continually choosing who we will be. Denial of these possibilities is bad faith. There's no preordained meaning. There's no preordained purpose to life. Why are we here? Well, why not? Why are we here? What does that question even mean? I personally think that most of the time when people ask why are we here, that's kind of a hangover from strictly theological thinking. That there should be an intention, and that intention should be something that can be expressed in anthropomorphic terms. What was the point of all this? What makes you think there's a point? Why on earth should there be a point? The point is, we should ask ourselves, what is my point for making this choice? And maybe I don't have one. Maybe it is just an arbitrary choice, and I'm making an arbitrary choice as an expression of my freedom, of embracing possibilities. Okay? Bad faith, very important theme for Sartre. Of course, living through World War II, having been a member of the French Resistance, he sees betrayal and hypocrisy and denial left and right. Okay? Did not mean a pun by saying left and right, but you could use that. You could say the entire political spectrum certainly can be guilty of bad faith. But bad faith is denying our essential freedom. I shouldn't say essential, okay? Scratch that. Don't want to use the term essence because that's going to be a little misleading. I'll point out, just in clarifying that essence does not precede existence. Okay? Existence precedes essence. The what we are is created by the that we are. Okay? So, personally, I don't find the term essence to be especially helpful in talking about the identity of human beings, the meaning of life, that sort of thing, because in this context, if it's all choice, and then it all could be otherwise, which is not generally what's meant by essence. Example that is given and repeatedly of denying our own choices, having a resignation to an alleged necessity, is this example of the waiter that he writes about. The waiter is too attentive. His movements are a little too deliberate. He is just really into being a waiter. Well, it's like Sartre says, this is bad faith because he is, he could be any number of things, but he has so identified with the role of waiter that it's taken him over completely. I think that's a little hasty to make that decision or to make that criticism. What if he's acting? You may see yourself as an actor. I'm playing this role. I know the role is not me. Okay. A musical celebrity from Japan who I enjoy very much, in an interview recently said, I am not this persona that that people idolize. That's a role I'm playing. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's entertaining them to play this role, but it's not me. And who I am in my personal life is not part of this. But yeah, you can play roles. Anyone who's done theater knows that you can play a role and give a great deal of nuanced authenticity or apparent authenticity, and it may be nothing like you. In fact, if you're good at creating that appearance, people may begin to assume that that's who you really are. I was in college. I was in a play called The Good Woman of Setsuan by Bertolt Brecht, and I played a complete cad. Just very, very nasty to the female protagonist of the play. After the play, during a meet and greet, someone who I didn't know stormed up to me, her eyes glaring, and said, "I hate you!" and stormed off. And I thought, I guess I did that pretty well. I did that role pretty well, but I knew it was a role. Maybe the waiter knows that he's playing a role. Why is he not free to play that role? To say, you know what, I'm going to be uber waiter. I'm going to play this role of waiter so well, it's going to be like an art. Okay? Martin Luther King said, look, do your job as well as you possibly can. Take pride in it. Even if you sweep the streets, even if you are sweeping the streets, be the best street sweeper you can possibly be. And he jokingly says, so that the heavenly choirs themselves call out, here was a street sweeper. Okay, well, presumably there's much more to your life than sweeping the street, but you know what? Why not? Why not just embrace it? Why not just throw yourself into it and play the role, knowing that it's a role? Okay, that my criticism would be you would need to, if you know that it's a role, it's not bad faith. If you forget that it's a role, that can become bad faith because now you're denying your possibilities and denying your freedom. I think in interpersonal relationships and in professional relationships and so forth, certainly on the political scene, people forget that they're playing a role and become, or at least lose the line between who they are and what they're playing. They become deluded into thinking that this is who they really are, not that this is a choice, that this is what they're deciding to do. Sometimes people who are, clinical depression is a whole different matter. It's a neurological disorder. You can't just tell clinically depressed people, well, just cheer up or just look at it differently because their brain's not functioning properly. I mean, it's like if, we all sometimes, I like to say, we all sometimes feel that we're running a race uphill, but for some people who have certain sorts of difficulties, whether neurological or otherwise physical, they're running that uphill race carrying a dead horse on their shoulders. Yelling at them, "Will you please hurry up?" is not going to help. Okay, but supposing someone just has a bad attitude, and some people do have, if you will, a destructive attitude. Okay, very often what they're doing is they're saying, it's miserable, everything's going to fail, I'm going to be sad today, my relationships are going to sour, blah, 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 and it has to be that way. It can't be any other way. That becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, which is a denial that you are actually making choices. Just use an example. As I used actually in a children's play I wrote once. Are you mad at me? No, I'm not mad at you. Yes, you are. You're mad at me. No, really, I'm not mad at you. Well, then why are you using that tone? I'm not using a tone. Now listen to that. You are using a tone. I am not using a tone. And now you're yelling at me. All right, fine. Now I am mad. Aha. You see? I knew it. No, you treated it. You've treated it as if it was real and inevitable rather than the result of a series of choices. And that's bad faith. You see how bad faith can be, destructive in a number of ways. Okay, Sartre thought that, let's see, money. Okay, the biggest excuse is I can't be free. I can't do this. I can't do that. I can't choose differently. Why? Well, because I have bills to pay. Well, because I need to have this, that, and the other thing, and I can't have them unless I make enough money. And this is where, this isn't freedom. This is where, as the transcendentalists put it, the American philosophers, the transcendentalists like Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau, they said, look, things are in the saddle, they ride us, in Emerson's terms. We no longer own our possessions, they're owning us. Why? Because we have stopped admitting that we're making choices. We've stopped we've stopped our possibilities, frozen them, and said, no, I have to do this. I have to be this. I have to accept, sometimes martyring myself, saying, oh, I'm so miserable. Well, but you're choosing the things that make you miserable. Yeah, but I have no choice. Aha, yes, you do. This is just bad faith. Okay, money keeps us locked into an illusion of necessity when in fact we're making choice. Okay, Sartre particularly was a critic of capitalism the means of production, the culture of consumption and so forth, creates the illusion of necessity and denies the fluidity of existence. We can just say, I don't care about whether society approves of me. I know that I do not really need all these possessions that society is telling me I have to have if I'm going to be happy. For that matter, I don't even have to be happy. I can have a life that I'm content with, that I find interesting and engaging, even if I don't have what most people would call happiness. It's a pretty radical idea, but it's true. Is happiness overrated? Well, probably not, but it's probably oversimplified. Many people would criticize Sartre as far as embracing Marxism and saying, well, Marxism is a recognition of our possibilities. It is a rejection of capitalism's attempt to create an illusion of necessity. Well, are you talking about theoretical Marxism? Or are you talking about real, honest-to-goodness cultures that call themselves Marxist? Or what are you talking about? And is it not true that Marxist cultures may in fact be as dedicated to denying our freedom? I don't want to sound like a red baiter here, because I'm definitely not. Karl Marx, toward the end of his life, was asked a question about Marxism, and he scoffed and replied, "Don't ask me, I'm not a Marxist." But what did he mean by that? I am not a Marxist. In other words, you've taken my ideas, you've taken my aspirations and actions, and you have turned them into an ideology, which means that you've fossilized them, you've paralyzed them, you've turned them into not choices, not a whole host of possibilities, but into, if you will, the illusion of necessity, which he found anathema. But the basic point is, I mean, when you start comparing different economic systems, that's kind of slippery. The great jazz musician Cab Calloway used to sing, "It ain't what you do, it's the way what you do it." And in fact, whether we talk about democracy or capitalism or socialism or whatever, there's a good deal of reason to say, it ain't what you do, it's the way what you do it. Because every way that you try, if you take an ideology of any kind, a system of any kind, and say, this is what we're going to do, you have already eliminated some possibilities and fixed in concrete others, unless you have a different attitude and say, no, these are just some suggestions. We're going to try some things, but we're going to remember at all times, in good faith, that we have all manner of possibilities before us, and we can make all manner of choices. And none of those choices are inevitable. They are choices. Existence is fluid. Bad faith, we accept things that we don't really believe and act as though they are true in order to avoid pain. It's easier, or at least appears to be easier in the short term, to run from freedom, except for the fact that in doing so we are gutting our lives. We're withering any ability to have some sort of meaning in our life. Pretending we have no options, Sartre talks about a negative ecstasy, okay? Another aha moment, okay? When we realize we're wasting our lives, we realize our situation is intolerable. So what do? Maybe we get drunk. Maybe we throw ourselves into pickup culture. Maybe we just try to make as much money as possible so we can distract ourselves with our toys. Maybe we simply return to boring, mundane routines to drown out that awareness. When I was a kid, I had a paper route when I was a kid, and I was delivering papers, and my paper route took me past a bar. One day, an older gentleman stepped out of that bar just as I was going by, looked around in bewilderment, and then simply called out, "It's all the same." Well, I'm not making that up. It's all the same. And I remember I did ask him something like, "What is all the same?" And he looked a little confused and said, "It's all the same." Well, one can see that as this is maybe he had just had an aha, you know. He realized that he was utterly unsatisfied with his life. He tried to drink himself into oblivion so he didn't have to be aware of his freedom, let alone do anything about it. When he came out of the bar into the light, literally into the light of day, it was just irresistible to realize that nothing had changed. Okay? To change anything, you have to choose to change it. And people feel, very often, I'm trapped, I'm helpless, I can't possibly change it. I have to choose what I'm choosing because I can't choose anything else. That is bad faith. You know, had someone said to Jean-Paul Sartre, "It's all the same," Sartre might have responded, "Then change it." Okay. As I mentioned before, being precedes essence. Our thatness precedes our whatness. Our whatness comes of our choices. Being includes endless possibilities. All we are not, but could be. The first module of the course, I had a quotation from Hamlet. We know what we are, but not what we may be. Think of that in the, see, I was thinking ahead. Think of that in these terms. We know what we are. In other words, we have this fixed idea of who we are, but not what we may be. We realize that actually we have a freedom, a capacity to change that. And that may be a little scary because we know not what we may be. Okay. Typically, if we're trapped in a relationship, a job, a location, or any kind of self-limiting situation, we look for someone to blame. We blame the other. Blaming the other is a classic example of bad faith. Instead of saying I must choose differently, I say I can't choose differently because, the demands of my job. Well, does the world end if you no longer have the job? Oh my God, if I no longer have that job, I'll die. No, probably you won't. If I no longer have this relationship, I'll just die. One of my favorite lines from a discussion of of the philosophy of love is if someone says to you, I can't live without you, ask them, then why are you still alive? Obviously, I mean, that's a kind of a emotional blackmail. Do you want to kill me by ending this relationship? No, maybe what I'd like is for both of us to be free, to choose something that means something to us. Okay, but typically people in relationships that they find unsatisfactory may feel an inertia. They may feel a terror of not having that self-definition, that illusion of solidity, if you will. And so they blame the other. How about blame being a useless passion? Instead of blaming, make a choice. Commit yourself to that choice. Now, is Sartre sticking an accusatory finger in our faces? Is Sartre criticizing us, disrespecting us? No. He is basically if you see a person having a nightmare, you may want to shake them and say, hey, wake up. It's just a nightmare. It's not real. Well, if you are locked into some sort of miserable life, maybe there are choices you can make to change that. Sartre is doing something actually benevolent. He's saying, wake up. It doesn't have to be like this.